Welcome, everyone, to session 16C, Agility, Dynamic Metadata, and Self-Service. This is a panel discussion, and our panel moderator is Ed Sheehy, who's a strategic consultant with Ab Initio, and he's been there over 12 years. Ed is going to lead a discussion of his customers describing how they use dynamic metadata to control complex data ecosystems, provide agility, and unleash data's business value. So Ed, all yours.
Sure. Let me introduce myself a bit. As Wayne mentioned, I have been with Ab Initio for a dozen years. I come out of banking as my industry background. Last job in industry I had was the head of the data program for a finance transformation effort at JPMorgan Chase. It was the third attempt at such a program. This attempt was actually successful. It was successful because we managed speed to market and able to scale up to manage data coming into finance. And it's over a thousand systems. And the key to that was using Ab Initio as a metadata configured data onboarding and processing framework. We'll talk a little bit more about those capabilities, particularly with Guillermo, whom I'll introduce and allow him to introduce in a second. Prior to that, I worked at Price Waterhouse. I was the editor of the data resources methodology in the 1990s there. And so I've been in data my entire career. Let me explain why I'm at Ab Initio. Ab Initio as a company has originated in 1995. The founders of Ab Initio came out of supercomputing, massively parallel supercomputing, 64,000 CPUs on a backplane. They created a software platform that was massively parallel, that's been very successful in market, so successful that Ab Initio never really developed a marketing wing. So we largely go to market by word of mouth. Anything we do or say will prove with business case in technical proof of concept. That's the extent of our marketing. So anything you hear today that's interesting, we will definitely follow up with you. And if there's a business case, we can prove it. Ab Initio, again, attracted my interest, not just because of this scalability being massively parallel software, but also because it processes almost any type of data, any type of structured data, and any regularly parsable unstructured data. So for example of that is we process PDF Acrobat files for the Department of Defense invoices. Ab Initio runs exactly the same way on all of the platforms it supports, which is very good. So it's essentially future-proof. It's managed in the 1990s when it came to market. It was running on IBM SP2s, massively parallel computers. It then migrated to other Unix platforms, symmetrical multiprocessing platforms. And over the years now, it's running on mainframes, Windows, Hadoop, all the major cloud vendors. And the applications just have to change configuration. The application logic doesn't change as you migrate across architectures and across platforms. Key things for you to understand as we're talking about metadata today and the use of metadata is that Ab Initio is not just a metadata repository. It's a metadata processing system. So metadata is sourced from different product systems, islands of metadata across your firm, integrated. We control metadata quality. We distribute metadata. And as I alluded to before, we use metadata to configure data processing, which is a unique capability. So we actually, on onboarding data at many different customers, are also managing and controlling data quality so that bad data doesn't get onto a data lake, for example. This degree of reuse is very important, very valuable, but I don't want to give you a big infomercial here. I think the panel's use of Ab Initio in their enterprise is very intriguing, and that's really more valuable for you guys. So let me just start off by asking the panel to introduce each other And Ann, you're the first window on my left here, so if you could start.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Ed, for inviting me here today. I always love a chance to talk about data and data governance. I've been working with data in one capacity or another for nearly 30 years now, starting back when few jobs actually had data in the title. Maybe data entry and DBA were about it. So it's been fantastic to see this increasing awareness of the importance of data over the years and the emergence of today's data disciplines, and especially conferences like this focused purely on data. I've spent about the last 10 years focused on data governance roles, and I've had the opportunity to stand up data governance activities in a number of organizations across several industries, but the majority of my time has been in healthcare. And I'm currently the Director of Data Architecture and Data Governance at an organization called Service Benefit Plan Administrative Services Corporation, which is an affiliate of CareFirst Incorporated. At SBPASC, we provide health insurance administrative services in support of the Federal Employee Health Benefit Program, which is the largest single employer group health plan in the nation. So we administer the health benefits for 5.5 million federal government employees, retirees, and their family members. We've been in this business for 60 years. And as such, we have decades of historical data and technologies ranging from mainframe to big data to cloud and everything in between. I've been with the organization a little over 2 years, and I've been focused in that time on evolving our data strategy, implementing data governance, and working to change the culture and the mindset around data.
Excellent, Dan. Guillermo, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I work in a Mexican bank. We are the second largest bank in Mexico, which I was discussing puts us as a large mid-tier bank in the US. But we have all the challenges of a national bank that came from the 20th place to currently the second. My role is innovation and architecture, not the technical hardware architecture, but I'm more interested in the process architecture and data architecture of the bank, which is a wonderfully complex, people-intensive process because people don't understand data. We have a question for the panel that I mean, it's lovely to say that there's no answer. It's always difficult to manage people and data at the same time. I've been in banking for 13, 14 years. And before that, I've been in consulting, in telecoms and other roles, basically doing what I do today. So, you know, doing innovation and trying to change the culture to be more efficient around the organization. That's about it.
Great, great. Scott?
Well, thank you, Ed. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for the invitation. It's truly an honor to be here. My name is Scott Wickliffe, and I'm the manager of data governance and metadata at FedEx. And through my 23 years at FedEx, I started out requirements writer for revenue. I was with a group of people that brought in data warehousing to the enterprise level, worked with the international teams to do the same. Then I made my journey. I really made it a goal to really understand as much as FedEx as possible. So I went into finance. I did mergers and acquisitions a little bit. The activity-based cost accounting system at FedEx was one of my big babies to launch at FedEx, which was really cool and very data intensive, as you can imagine. Went on to marketing and then sales support and then back into IT. And so for the last year, I've been, as I say, the manager of data governance and metadata management. FedEx is a company provides customers and businesses a broad portfolio of transportation, e-commerce, and business services. And we have about 570,000 team members worldwide. So you can say it's a pretty big operation, to say the least. With all our product offerings, integrated business solutions, we generate about 84 billion in annual revenue. So for us as a company, it really is all about pulling disparate data. You know, our architecture just for metadata management is highly complex. We bridge not gaps, we bridge Azure, OCI, GCP, on-prem, co-locations, and you know, we have a very broad range of databases. So our challenge, just purely from an architecture and connectivity, is a large one, to say the least. And so the journey FedEx has been on has been several years of focusing on data catalog, but my job was really to broaden the capabilities, ingrain and bring in the governance aspect, as well as getting, you know, more discipline into the whole field. So that is, you know, my passion point at FedEx, and a little bit about myself. So again, Ed, thank you so much.
Sure. So now I'll be the moderator here, and we'll entertain some Q&A. Hopefully you'll find it entertaining and informative. So Anne, can you explain, you know, just from a way of personal motivation, why you got involved in the data governance aspects of healthcare?
Sure. Well, I have an absolute passion for healthcare and for data. So this sort of intersection is just really a sweet spot for me. I think there are three key things that really fascinate me about this space. The first and foremost is that healthcare is really a place we can do good with data, right? Leveraging data to improve the lives of patients and improve the quality of care just is truly an inspiring mission and an opportunity to really make a difference. So that's key. But the second interesting thing around data to me is that healthcare data, that is, the stakes are so high. And this is why data governance is so critical. When you're dealing with people's medical care, quality, privacy, and security of the data are vital. There is no room for error when the data affects the course of patient care. And frankly, even if it's just related to administrative processes, you know, poor data quality, it can have real member impact at times when people are potentially dealing with, you know, very serious issues, health issues of their own or of their family members. So even though data governance may seem somewhat back office, the work that we do really has a very direct impact on our members. And then the last thing I would say is it's amazingly challenging. And I love a good challenge. So in healthcare, the data is incredibly complicated. There are so many players in the ecosystem, and the regulatory landscape is constantly changing. So I know it's a place I'll never get bored.
Great. So Anna, a follow-up question for you, and this is probably of general interest to our audience here, is that your firm shares data with multiple third-party business partners within your organization and outside the walls of your organization. And one of the big issues here is that people have different understanding of data. They may call the same thing, the same concept, different names. They may use the same name and mean different concepts. How are you addressing that challenge?
Yeah, this is huge. Like us, I think, as it is with everyone else. We share the same data across many internal systems, as well as with many partners who then expose the data in their systems. And customers and members, they access all of these platforms or receive some kind of output from these platforms. So ensuring the data is consistent and appropriately used across all of these platforms really does depend on everyone speaking the same language. You know, there are a lot of EDI standards in healthcare, and you would think that, you know, that would make this easy, but what I see with EDI traditionally is that the formats of the exchange are very well described, but what exactly each field means is often left to a lot of interpretation. And again, with the complexity of healthcare data, this is particularly difficult, right? Because it's so nuanced. But one simple example, we have a data element in healthcare that is the healthcare provider. We have at least 6 different types of provider. They can be the billing or rendering. They can be the performing, the prescribing, the admitting, the attending. These are all different roles that a provider plays. And if we're exchanging provider information, which one is this? And what do those terms really mean? And are we all calling them by the same names? So there are just countless examples like that in healthcare data.
So just a humorous aside here. When I was in Catholic grammar school at the age of 8, and sister was explaining the 10 Commandments to us, we ran across the do not commit adultery. And I had the effrontery to stand up in class and say, I don't understand. What's the matter with that? What's the matter with kids dressing up in adults' clothes? And apparently I didn't have the right definition of adultery. So getting common language is really clear. I didn't find out the meaning for some years afterward, by the way. So that's important. So Scott, similar question at FedEx, you have multiple LOBs in different geographies all over the globe. How do you harmonize definitions globally, but also allowing for local variants, which may be local variants because of legal jurisdiction requirements?
So, we're actually embarking on answering that very question right now. Prior about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had about 6 data dictionaries, or business glossaries, should I say, be more precise. And we made a decision with the support of our executive leadership that we will collapse it down to 1. So our approach is forcing the conversation to be a singular conversation. We've also adopted the approach similar to like what Webster's dictionary does, where there's definition 1, definition 2, et cetera. So there'll be the enterprise approved business glossary for each term. We will note who is using that term. And if there are any differences, you'll see that. Now, people really want to, that I use this word lightly, challenge our definitions, and we intend to use the issue management function to raise an issue with that. But part of the whole process is wrapped up in our workflow. So anybody can recommend a business glossary term, but we use the workflow, and it goes through approvals, and it ultimately goes through our business and IT steward to get approval to make sure there's alignment between the business units and the IT units. So those are some of the techniques that we're using, but we do feel strongly that you can really get the maximum value with a singular business glossary.
And Scott, I understand from earlier conversations that we've had that you're really looking at metadata and your data program, your data governance program, as driving to create business self-service for greater business agility across FedEx. Can you explain what this means in terms of a larger agenda, like business? Because, and just to prompt you here, what I've heard from other customers is that business self-service means this first part of understanding what data is in logical business terms, to remove the barrier to understand where that data exists and what quality is, what the source of record is for that data, and then really where does it exist? Like, how do I navigate through data space in my firm to get at data? Can you talk about how you're approaching that business self-service agenda for access to data?
Wow, that's that's a big one. I mean, do I have about 3 or 4 hours to talk here? Because it really hits on the heart of all of our challenges that, I mean, really not only we, but all companies have. But so for us, self-service, the way we're approaching is number one, our team is responsible for actually providing the mechanism to get the data catalogs into the central repository, the metadata hub. And it's generally auto-populated, so it's constantly scanning, pulling information in. Our future there is going to be in the automatic continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline. The business glossary has a key role here, as I had just explained that to breaking down the silos is very important. But now you sort of get into some more of the self-service areas that we have. A lot of the questions is, what is the data? Where is the data? Can I trust it? Can I use it? What's the lineage of the data? We we're setting it up where we do bits and pieces of it, but we also are setting up the semantic discovery, data quality, and data profiling to be more self-service. So when a customer, and I call internal customers, go in and look at our data catalog, we have a faceted search. They build shopping carts, if you will, once they find the data. So in that process by itself, we're breaking down the silos of knowledge and giving people visibility. So once they have their cart full, then they can run or request semantic discovery to be run. They can run data analysis or data quality and data profile. And then they can get their answers back to really see, can I trust this data, and learn more about the data. So the self-service part is a multi-dimensional effort to really satisfy the needs. Where I see it is in the faceted search approach, the business glossary to give the business perspective, and then these other capabilities. Take away the mystery. So they literally just submit a request. I want to profile this. And the reason why we do it that way too at FedEx is, our data is so large that we just can't have users going in and just submitting, data quality and data profiles at any time, because you're talking, about some tables having billions of rows of data. And so, we actually have to schedule some of the bigger jobs. So that's where it's sort of a delicate balance between the user and our technical team, but we are trying to give even more. Now, there are parts of data enrichment that we also let the end users do, and we're just now venturing into that, but it's going to be a very well-defined pieces of information that builds on the base of a catalog that's been captured.
Yeah, and kind of going to a statement that Guillermo made a few minutes ago, that this is a people's problem, not just a data problem. So, to what extent, Scott, at the 525,000, whatever it was, colleagues that you have at FedEx, you're dealing with this one-room schoolhouse in which you have people with different degrees of data literacy, different maturity of data programs in their lines of business. How do you work across this this interesting set of people?
Yes, so that's where it's a journey we're beginning, and it comes down to communication as well as training. So just making people aware that we have the ability to break down the silos through metadata management and our tools that we have in place. So communication is huge. Top-down communication is just a critical success factor. Other things that we're doing, and we're just starting on, and our stewardship committee is getting ready to create the roadmap, is we're going to focus on the most important subject areas. We look at our data in subject areas, and we will be picking projects that will showcase the value generation of subject areas, and then we'll showcase it on a central site where we can start proving the value. So there's a lot to that where the senior management, I do always go back to the senior management, because this really is a top-down exercise. It's generally thought of as bottom up. I even hear the comments that it's a process that, it's just a detail to setting up databases, but it's really not. It really has to be seen as the lens through which you see your data, which I think is a culture change in probably most of companies that are, starting on this journey.
So Scott, one more question there. Like, what do you expect, and what do you understand of the expectations of your management team for what this greater business self-service access to data? How's that going to transform FedEx? How's that going to help FedEx achieve its business objectives?
So, what's really interesting. So, it sort of gets into the basic question of just why data governance. And, I will start with our founder, Fred Smith, that from day one, he had this saying that data about the package is as important as the package. So that leads to many initiatives. Then it goes into our data first strategy, where it's the belief that data-driven insights, and this is where I'm sort of getting to the answer to your question, I believe, is the data-driven insights drive transformation and fuels what's called innovate digitally for us. And this requires an analytics infrastructure and data-oriented culture. And what the result of this is that we fully expect that it's going to increase agility, speed to market, data value. And so I believe it's really has to be a cultural top-down response to what you're asking.
Good. So let me go back to Ann, if you don't mind, Ann, because it's interesting, as you mentioned, that your business has been around for 60 years, and you have these longitudinal data sets here of healthcare information. But I think many of the panel and certainly people across industry here have the issue that the institutional knowledge of this historical data tends to disappear when people like me get to a certain age and they retire. So how are you working, Ann, to try and keep that knowledge alive in your company?
Yeah, having been around for 60 years, this is a huge issue for us. We have systems that just, built over decades, and much of the knowledge about how they work is in the heads of these long tenured employees, especially a lot of the deep data knowledge. And these folks know the history, and they know why things won't always work the way you might expect them to, right? But what I have found is that having these SMEs document their knowledge is actually a lot harder than it sounds. If you go to someone and you ask them to document, all their knowledge from the last 10 or 20 or 40 years in their job, and we have a lot of those, 30 and 40 years, they don't know where to start. Literally, they don't know what they know. And I've seen some folks, make attempts with audio recordings of interview sessions and transcribed documents, and you end up, with something that really in the end isn't usable. You would have to listen to hours of audio or search through documents. So what I see missing in the way this is typically done is a logical framework for the process. First, something that helps the subject matter expert think about what they actually know. And then secondly, to facilitate that retrieval, right, by the person who needs the information. So what we're doing is we're treating this data knowledge as metadata, and we're capturing it right along with our definitions and our data types, sort of, baking a wiki right into our metadata repository.
Yeah, one technique, and that I found to be useful in the past is data profiles, as Scott mentioned before. So just within a data domain, when you have somebody who's a subject matter expert, you say, what happened in the data between 1992 and 1993? Our unit of measurement clearly changed, or what going on? And so prompting people, as you say, like they don't really know what they know or what you don't know, but asking them like focus questions like this about the quality and the contents of data over historical time periods often is a way of getting, oh yeah, we did a system conversion at that time, and or there was a regulatory change and things of that nature. Do you do that at all, Ann?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're doing is we're attaching narrative, right, to all of our business metadata objects and our technical metadata objects. And we can use profiling as part of the process as well. We're having the subject matter experts go through the tool. look at all the objects, think, what do I know about this? Profile the data, and then go, oh, now I remember this thing happened, right? And they're able to document it right there. I'll tell you what, I think the best thing about it, it helps them to know what to document. It helps the consumers, right, to be able to search and find it. But the best thing of all is it puts the information in a place where people will see it when they didn't know they needed it. I never would have thought to ask someone this question, right? But this is a way to get that documented right in the metadata repository. When I'm looking for the other basic information, here is these extra just golden nuggets that I really need to have.
Excellent, excellent. Guillermo, over to you here. As we mentioned earlier, ab initio data processing applications themselves can be configured with metadata for reuse in particular. That metadata can map logical business terms to physical record formats. It can also pass even business processing rules into a framework application. Can you discuss the strategic implications of this capability for a bank such as yourself? And to be able to reuse consistent logic across or consistent or configurable logic across what could be hundreds of different interfaces and systems. And Guillermo, you're on mute.
Yeah, yeah, sure. The ability to use metadata to control processes has been, at least in the role that I play, key in transforming the bank. We try to simplify processes because banks have historically taken the role that, especially the business side, the gold card is completely different than the platinum card, and this other card was not. It's exactly the same process. It just has tweaks. Right. And using metadata to have a single processing platform and be able to configure that has driven us, has made us scale some things in a wonderful fashion. The first instance I can think of is our campaign system that went from, 7 years ago, we had 8 campaigns using email. Today we do 400, 500 campaigns a day with millions and millions of hits each day. It just scaled by such a huge number, and it's completely configurable in metadata. Every campaign is configured by metadata with the users. So the ability to do that has allowed the bank to scale in its processes in a dramatic fashion. And specifically, the campaign system has revenue attached to it. So the implications are wonderful, at least for a couple of the teams that were involved in that. Other systems that are beginning to do this is, for example, the credit card system, not the actual balance, but the credit card management system. When you actually convince the users that this is a single process and the metadata associated with the different cards is what drives the different variables, it begins to flow in a much simpler fashion and much more configurable. So the strategic implications are we get to simplify things dramatically and reduce cost.
So in my experience at banks, when you try to simplify and standardize around like a concept like net interest margin, all of a sudden you've opened up a bag of cats here, in which people go, hey, you're not changing the definition of net interest margin. My performance bonus is based on the way I'm running my business. So there's a cult, like you said before, it's not just technology issues. It's using the data governance capability of the platform to drive business change. It's not easy work. Can you talk a little bit about challenges that you've had along those lines?
Yes, it's not easy. No, we had one system that we're also simplifying, consolidating this to a single process, which is the document management. We currently have over 27 document management systems in the bank. And we went to the users and asked one simple question: what's the valid duration for this document? So how long, not how long do I need to keep it for, because I'm going to keep it forever. Don't worry about that. How long is it valid for a customer? Right. You can't get a response. just don't get around. No, we don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Oh no, this one is infinite. No, it can't be infinite. It's you need to go, as Anne was saying, it's a very hard work and it's people intensive. You go and sit down with them and talk it over, and it's just difficult. There is no easy solution. I wish there were.
Yeah. So this is the there is no easy answers to the tough problems of life, Guillermo. Dealing with people is job one. Everything we do, I think, needs to somehow move data culture an inch at a time, like trying to get through the Holland Tunnel on the 4th of July weekend in New York City, right? So every day it's a battle in traffic here, how to move the culture a little bit, and everything needs to be geared around that. Scott, back to you. One of the greater challenges culturally is driving accountability for data between the producers and the consumers of data. They're often the Hatfields and McCoys here. How are you doing that at FedEx?
Okay, so I'm gonna sound like a broken record. At least the very first part of my answer is, it's a top-down exercise, signaling to the corporation, the senior VPs and executive VPs. Even our CIO talks about data often. So it starts out with messaging that it is important and that this is the value. So that's the beginning of it. But in terms of the actual mechanics of basically what we're implementing, there's 4 major components to it. Number one is when we're ingesting new data into like our analytics environment, for example, we capture the data catalog and information, but the data is assigned a subject area. And then each subject area, like a customer can be a subject area, operations can be a subject area. Then each subject area, and this is what we're struggling with, but this is our strategy, is we'll have an enterprise lead steward that is over the, as it says, over the enterprise, but this is more monitoring and control. This is a person that just looks at what's going on in that subject area. It's very high level, but they know who to reach out to. But then there's also the IT steward and business steward. So right as we start the definition process of data, the subject area and stewardship assignments are made. In the process of capturing data, the second sort of dimension of accountability is we've established the minimums for what we expect to be collected. So if you're a DBA or a developer or a data scientist, there's roughly 22 pieces of information, if you will, that we call the minimums. And now as we mature, those minimums are going to be tightly controlled. But for right now, they're making this term up, I guess, they're loosely controlled. Just to make sure we're getting them all. On all the new data sets, we're doing our best to make sure the minimums are captured. But then you start getting into the stick, so to speak, of accountability. So just last week, I think it was last week, I had started a meeting between InfoSec, audit, and legal, and we're crafting standards, and they're not. It's not going to be like what people imagine, like a 10-page standard document. I'm talking about standards on 1 page that is going to be widely published, and we will decide as a stewardship committee and governance structure, how far do we push that in terms of, will it become an audit issue or finding for those responsible for creating data or not? At this point, I can't say, but I do know we are standing up the procedures from that point. So those are those standards. So those standards, as I said, goes for the DBA, the developers, data scientists, and we will discuss further how to embed it deeper. Then the fourth leg of accountability is we have a very basic dashboard, and the only purpose of that dashboard is to let the stewards understand how well the subject area they're assigned to is doing from capturing the minimums. Because our belief here is, step one is just really getting the right data at the right time so that we can unleash the value to the corporation, and so it can be trusted, et cetera. So we have a dashboard that does that, and it basically, the stewards can go in, they limit on their name, and they get their statistics, how many tables are in their purview, and there's, I think, like 8 or 9 metrics that says how well are you doing. And for full transparency, right now, we're not doing too well, but we're doubling down on the discipline today. So we've established the framework to do that. Then these 4 pillars, as they're going to be working together, senior leadership is, having the message from top down. Communication and training is then the next part. And training, we plan to release an actual training video. We will conduct just lunch and learns, if you will, for people to join. And I'm sure as we advance and mature in this area, there'll be even more techniques. So that's basically our framework for accountability.
Yeah. So I'm going to continue to beat the drum here on the importance of culture change. And in an earlier conversation, we were discussing Peter Drucker's famous statement that culture eats strategy for breakfast. With those humbling words of caution, can you explain how you've worked to implement data accountability and governance in a way that fits within your firm's culture? And in particular, can you tell us about how the phrase data ownership was somewhat toxic within your firm's culture, and how you had to adapt and work with that?
Yeah, a little bit of it is my personal approach as well. I think culture is so important, and I think there's 2 key things. First, you have to be mindful of the culture you're in, and then you have to work to create the culture you want. My mother had a saying that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And I always keep this in mind when I'm implementing data governance and onboarding data stewards. In some organizations, if you come in with a rigid and control focused framework, it's going to be like catching flies with vinegar. So how do you make it more like honey, right? Especially when you are early in the process, identifying your stewards and onboarding them. These are the folks that are the ambassadors to your organization, and you really need them to champion the mission. So I work very hard to create a culture that the stewards want to be part of. Data governance is a team sport, and to me, like, there's no I in team, there's no owner in data governance. Data really is a shared asset these days. We have few data elements that aren't even authored, updated, not to mention consumed by more than one business area. So really for us, a shared accountability model makes a lot more sense than singular ownership. And, the term data owner just doesn't really fit with the culture that I'm trying to build.
Yeah. Can you maybe generalize on that in terms of how to adapt process and software platforms like Ab Initio to support data governance as a fit within culture? Do you have any other observations on that, Ann?
Yeah, well, it's really pretty simple. You can't go with a one size fits all, right? Flexibility and configurability are key. You have to be able to adapt your processes to your model and adapt your tools to your processes. So you need flexibility. I've created a somewhat complicated accountability model that's RACI-like, and it has different levels of participation depending on the data domain and the steward's area of responsibility. And so it creates for a complicated workflow, and something like this definitely needs flexible tools. And it's more difficult to manage, and there's some extra work in configuring the tools, but I feel it pays off in the end by really fostering the collaboration that I'm after, and creating a sustainable culture around data governance where you get people to want to do this rather than to have to do it.
Great. So I'm going to pivot a bit. Guillermo, you were talking before about campaign management and the cycles of campaigns that you're doing before. And I understand from other projects that we're working with your bank that you're trying to collect all of the activities, the experience of customers, not just their transactions and balance history, in order to, what we see as a common enough strategy in banking today, and even across industries, of understanding each individual customer, what journeys they're on in life, what are their transition points, what's the next best action to do in these cases. And this is a culture change in banking in particular, in so many different ways, in which people in banks tend to look at their customers through the binoculars of the products that they're selling. They're not looking at the customer holistically. Can you maybe talk about how you're trying to use data to and embracing culture change, trying to move culture in this way for this strategy to work?
Sure. We have a very particular view because, as you say, most people focus on the next best action as what's the next best thing to sell the customer. So they talk about the customer journey as in, okay, when he is having kids, we can sell him a loan to get this. The focus that we have on the bank is that we are trying to find out where the problems lie in the customer journeys. So not the wonderful thing that we're going to sell him, but what happens, and we have I have a very specific history, when in Mexico, then this is very particular, it doesn't apply in the US, but in Mexico, we still run our own ATMs as banks. So we have the history of, the excellent customer shows up at an ATM, puts his bank card in, and the card gets chewed up by the ATM. So what's the first thing you do? You call the bank. Where's the number? On the back of the card. Oh, I'm sorry. So you try, you run out to get the number, call them. What's the first thing they ask you? Give me the 16 digit of your number, of your card. Okay, so it starts to go down from there. You're entering the 7 levels of hell when there is a problem in the bank. So what we're trying to do is get data and get every single event in the bank to be able to get these people out of that problem. Because we create such complex processes and procedures that we don't understand them ourselves. I can tell you one that, so when we went live with the system, the first one we fixed, we have a wonderful process where we send the people a credit card. We used to have, we send people credit cards, and the credit card says, please activate it using your app. So, okay, the first time customer goes in and gets the app and, okay, give me your 16-digit number. Okay, you give it a 16, and internally it says, so that card isn't activated. I can't use it to activate the app. Okay, but it doesn't give you the message. And so the customers are stuck. So we're using this data, all the events are showing up to figure out where customers are getting into problems and there help them solve it instead of trying to sell them more stuff.
Right.
That creates, as Anne was saying, very large data sets. I wish well, thankfully I don't have the large data sets Anne has. Mine are a little smaller, but we run about 500 million records a day of events. We're getting to 1 billion records per day. So having a metadata-driven configurable event system is key, because otherwise having a change, oh, let's test this again in production, it's not going to work. Okay, so that's what we're doing.
Yeah. So this is these are really the kind of questions that we had today. I wanted to say one other thing, that if you go to the sponsors page, you can see a link to a demo in which we're showing the software platform for metadata management that's behind the stories that you've heard today from our panelists. And we have a few minutes left. Wayne, if you could maybe curate some of those questions, bearing in mind that not all the panelists can speak off the cuff on certain topics because of constraints within their public relations departments, but I certainly can talk with a great degree of freedom, and Guillermo, I think, has a little bit more latitude than maybe the other panelists.
Sure, and the great thing about this conference platform is that it lets people vote on the questions they're asked. So we'll start at the top with the top vote getting question. it says, good quality metadata, well managed is a must. There are good ways to discover, collect, and update technical metadata automatically, but business metadata is still a challenge.
Yeah.
What are best practices to encourage business stakeholders to produce it?
So I'll field that one, Wayne. Again, explaining our software capability. A definition mapped to a physical business term has to reconcile to the profile of contents in that data. And particularly in banking data, we see different, the profile often, and I'll give you just a trivial example, but I've seen it so many times, I can't even tell you about it. Interest rate. Interest rate can be encoded in whole decimal terms, 5% interest. It can be encoded as basis points. It can be encoded as decimals, 0.05. Semantically, every one of those is 5%. When you look at a profile of what interest rate is, and you come back to the definers with the realities of the content that it's trying to label, then you get, okay, for these product set, the unit of measurement is basis points. For these, it's whole decimals. And so there's an interaction in validating the contents with the business term, the abstract business term, particularly when people approach this top down with, let's say, a FIBO business ontology, in which they're taking certain definitions, or they're taking the Federal Reserve in banking has a standard definition for the contents and report terms, which banks can leverage and we can import into the metadata hub, so that you can use that to say, okay, our contents kind of sort of don't reconcile with the Federal Reserve's definition. So we need to do some data transformation to harmonize to that definition because they're measuring us.
Can I interject a little just to add something?
Yeah.
Because I think the thing is, business stakeholders don't want to produce metadata because it's hard work. But if you provide agility around the process of that metadata, then they'll be very willing to provide it. Because right now, changing an interest rate takes forever in some processes. If you tell them, look, we need to standardize this, get it documented well, so that the process can feed off that metadata, and then you will have the ability to change that in an instant. That's when the business says, okay, then sometimes they get to work at it, or at least that's my experience.
Right. Okay, rapid fire to much of the extent we can in 6 minutes remaining. Wayne, can you give us the next vote getter?
Yeah. Related, as data people, we naturally understand the importance of good metadata, especially business metadata. It's a common theme here.
Right.
But can the panel share any measurable results where better metadata has led to clear business results? This would make metadata appreciated by non-data people as well.
So I have a cautionary tale of a bank whose name I will not mention, who was not tracking where they were getting their Fair Isaac scoring from Fair Isaacs, right? So they had people who had systems that were sourcing data from a database, which got turned off. It wasn't being updated anymore. So that the metadata describing the operation of that system was stale. And consequently, this bank was giving credit during an economic downturn that produced sizable losses for their firm. So understanding where you're sourcing data, understanding the freshness of that data is important. That's the data world. It's also true in the metadata context. This definition that we might have labored on, is that current as of the latest Federal Reserve ruling? Again, sorry, banking example. And so you want to see that there's been an update and that it now reconciles to the latest data policy. So things about metadata can also be used. And Ab initio manages data quality, and we also process metadata as data. So we can measure the staleness, the freshness, the currency, the completeness, the consistency of metadata. And we're often used that way in data programs to track, we're trying to get like 100% of the physical data assets defined in business terms, and we're at 20%. And it's tracking of things like that in a program basis. Wayne, next up.
All right. This one is, what data quality check platforms are you using in your organization to check that you can trust the data?
So what our experience in general, and I'm going to describe as the best practice here, is this is to the two issues. One, people know certain things can cause data quality issues. Like again, pardon me, but a banking example: a secured loan has to have a collateral asset. It's secured against something. Where is that? Where is that collateral? What's the market value of that collateral? Has it been marked to market or validated anytime recently? So it's still valid. That people know that. They don't know what they don't know. So here, machine learning will come and look against data sets and say, here's an anomaly. The anomaly it prompts subject matter experts. It gets routed to the subject matter experts in a domain to say, is this a true data defect or is this a false positive? And the semantic discovery product that we use for this is tunable, because certain times the algorithms are too wide in the nets that they cast, and so we need to narrow it to catch smaller fish. And other times they're too fine. So balancing false positives and false negatives in terms of the machine learning is things that we expose to customers. And then the subject matter experts will respond to that, and they say, well, that's true data quality. Once a data quality issue is identified, what we find is, again, key to driving culture change is that the control process to control that data quality has to be visible in business terms. So for people who are held accountable, they have to understand what is the control logic. They have to see the records with issues that the control identified as data quality issues. And then, and this is controls model 101 type stuff, the control metrics have to be pointed to an accountable party who has to do something about it. So if it's the source of record system that's producing this data, he or she then has to get the issue, and that issue has to be tracked through to resolution and diagnosis. So this is, and then there has to be follow-up to see that these remediations are holding over time, or that they're root remediations and we're actually fixing the issue at the source. And consistency of measurement is also important here, because data defect issues are often caught at the point of consumption by a data scientist or somebody generating a report. Being able to take that same control logic specified in logical business terms and reuse it up the data flow from which it comes up to ideally the source of record system is really key. It's often, we start with saying, here's a data quality issue because these two reports don't reconcile. One of them's right, one of them's wrong, maybe both are wrong. So then we go, where are they sourcing from? Is it the ultimate source of record? We can see that from data lineage because we can harvest this technical data lineage. If they're both sourcing from the same data lineage, the same source of record system, are they doing it with the same frequency? Because the 6 o'clock poll might be different than the 6:01 poll. And then maybe it's sourced correctly at the start, it shows up bad at the bottom, and we do a binary search technique across data lineage to say, okay, so where's the problem? This is like debugging any program, Wayne, and you look like somebody who might have written a program once. So we go and we debug with these binary search techniques to try and identify where the problem is. And that's only possible because the logical metadata can bind to different physical record contexts across the data flow.
Well, excellent. So you took us right up to the end of the session, Ed. So this is your chance to thank the panel and the audience. And
I have the greatest thanks and appreciation for our panelists and all the participants, the audience here. Hopefully you found this interesting, informative. Again, you can visit us on the sponsors page to see demos. We didn't maybe get to your question. You may have other questions. We'll respond to you just as quickly as we can. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.